Hate Steve Ouimette. Well, all right. It has been a long time. I've been asked this question for many, many years. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the cover of the Charlie Daniels classic, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, that was in Guitar Hero 3. Finally, the day has come. I'm going to do this in a 4-part series. I'm going to talk about how the gig came about, the people involved, the players, how it worked with Activision and Neversoft, the studios, behind the scenes, and then I will have subsequent videos which are how to play the rhythms, how to play the solos, and then finally how to play the victory solo. It's a deep dive and it's not for the faint of heart, but if you're willing to stick around, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Part 1 starts now. Stay tuned. So how did the gig come about? Well, I had just finished up all of the covers that I was working on in the game. I think there was 8 or 9. There should be a list here that shows the songs that I did. And that last song was Same Old Song and Dance from Aerosmith. We were just about ready to turn it in when I got a call. That call was that Joe Perry from Aerosmith had called in saying his son was a big fan of the game, brought it to his attention and said, "We want to be involved." And that first step of the involvement was replacing my cover with the original track from Aerosmith, which I will be the first to admit, the original is always the best. I've done hundreds of covers, and as much as I love doing it, I'll be the first person to say that, the original is the original. It's what burned into our ears from all the years of listening to it, and it's the original. So there's no arguing with it. Of course I wanted that song in the game, but I was a little disappointed because, I'm an Aerosmith fan. I was really getting into doing the cover, but there was a silver lining. And this is Alan Flores and Dave Rose's fault. I'm going to call you guys out. They said, "Hey, we're doing boss battles for the game, and we'd love to do a boss battle with you." I said, "Sounds good to me. Who's done a boss battle so far?" And they said, Slash and Tom Morello. I'm going, come on, guys. This is Guns N' Roses and Rage Against the Machine. And some guy in Scottsdale that's doing covers for the game is going to be the final boss battle, the most difficult song. Well, arguably, I think, Through the Fire and Flames. That's a whole other story. Wow, okay, what do you want me to do? And they said, how about we do a take on The Devil Went Down to Georgia? And I thought, that's a great idea. I would love to do that. I grew up with the Charlie Daniels version. I thought, this is cool. How do you want to treat it? And they said, well, we were kind of thinking about going for sort of a old school speed metal kind of version. I thought, yeah, it's perfect idea. So that's kind of how it came about. And it was the last song on the game. We really didn't have a whole lot of time. So I had to figure out, how can I turn this into something that's going to twist the player's fingers into pretzels and make it an exciting song that was dynamic and full of, difficult solos and fun. So that's how it came about. The next step that I had to figure out was, how am I going to go about making this work? And the first thing that you have to figure out is, what's the team that you're going to assemble? And I had already worked with a solid group of amazing players and studio guys that had done a lot of the covers. We had recorded this at Crush Studios in Scottsdale, which is just down the street from me here in the Air Park in Scottsdale. And Ryan Greene, who engineered and mixed all of the songs, was at the helm. And he recommended Bruce from Vaden, Bruce Weitz. And I thought, okay, I'd heard him before, and Bruce is this incredible drummer, and he did not let down. He totally delivered. So Bruce was the drummer. I played bass and guitar. And then from Cities on Flame with Rock and Roll, I had just worked with Chris Powers, amazing singer. This guy, Powers, is a perfect last name because this guy is ready to blow your microphone up. And I remember we recorded in this studio here, my home studio, and I specifically brought out a Shure SM7 because I knew that that particular mic, I could handle him singing loud into it and not, blowing it all out like my U87. I just I didn't want to get him anywhere near that, but it was a perfect mic for him. So he sang, I played guitars, bass, Bruce Weitz, Ryan Greene, and then we brought in a couple of other guys, and that's the next part. For the Jonnys parts, I needed to have someone who would be a good counter to my parts. I was going to play Lou Cypher. By the way, Lou Cypher, little backstory. Lou Cypher is Robert De Niro's character in Angel Heart, Mickey Rourke film, fantastic film. Lou Cypher, Lucifer, get it? I always thought that was super clever. So I was going to be playing his parts, and I wanted a counter. So I brought in a good friend of mine and an amazing guitar player at DeGenaro. And so the way that we worked this, he was in LA, I was in Arizona. So we used a tool back then. It was called You Send It at the time. I think it's called Hightail now. So it's pre-Dropbox, pre-AirDrop, pretty much pre-iPhone. So we were using different technology. But nonetheless, I would send him segments. I would send him my solo and a blank space for him to answer back to my solo. So it was kind of a duel. And he did an amazing job, as you know. So that is Jonnys number one. When you hear that, it's him and me going back and forth. But what happened was when I finished the song, the guys, they liked the song, but it was too short. So they kept on egging me on, hey man, we need more solos, Steve. Can you go, do another 16 bars each or another 8 bars each and extend it out 32 more bars? And I said, absolutely. And I don't think Ed was available at the time. So I brought in another good friend and amazing player and a Satriani student, Geoff Tyson. I'll leave links for all of these guys in the description. So Geoff was also in LA, did the same thing. I did a second segment, which is the second half of the solos, with a slightly different rhythm that obviously, in the song, and we'll go over that. But this guy Geoff's just one of those guys, and it was really hard to continuously come up with things that would be as interesting as his. And I think it ended up turning out really good. But that gave us a whole section of solos, and then another whole section of solos. And then, of course, then there was space left, and the guy said, hey, let's do a big super solo at the end, and that's the victory solo before we go back into the final bit of the song. So that is the Jonnys story. The gear that was used for the recording is pretty extensive. Like I said, we did this at Crush in Scottsdale, and that was Ryan's studio, Ryan Greene. He had an SSL J-Series board, and I always remember that we were constantly fighting the fact that that SSL was going to overheat because it had a refrigerator-sized rack of really old computers that ran that thing, and he had to have the AC in the engine room and the machine room cranked so that that thing was just not going to overheat. And there was no real automation. I mean, automation that we know now with DAWs and everything is 100% recall. This looked like a Pong game. It was the most primitive looking. You could play Pong on the machine. But when you'd want to recall settings, it would show you sort of a picture of the channel strip, and then you would manually go and, set it back the way that it was. And it did have moving fader automation, but that's how we had it set. And we had Pultex and Lexicon 480Ls and all sorts of great gear. The guitar amp that I used was Ryan's at the time. It was a Diesel VH4, and I used that through a Bogner 412 cabinet. I believe it had vintage 30s in it. We also had a Marshall cabinet that Bogner cabinet had vintage 30s and Celestion 75s in an X pattern. So we would mic up both speakers so you get different tones to blend. The guitar was an 80s Kramer Beretta that I borrowed from my friend Johnny, ironically Johnny. And also Johnny and my friend Tony and we had all been in this craze of modifying Marshalls, really bringing them back to stock from all of the horrible mods that have been done to a lot of these amps in the 80s and 90s. And so I used a Marshall, early 70s Marshall Super Lead for all of the solos. The bass amp was an Ampeg SVT with a P-bass. So totally typical rock bass sound. I don't know what the drums were. I don't even have any pictures of what Bruce was playing, but I do remember that it was a single kick with a double pedal. It was just a great time. Bruce just nailed it. I just remember being in the studio and Ryan and I were kind of just laughing because it was one of those, I can't believe this. This is going to be awesome. So it's interesting that most people know me for my work on this song, and of course I never would have planned it that way. I know that Charlie Daniels wasn't totally thrilled with the version of the song, and I think it had something to do with the possibility of the devil winning. My goal was that you would never be able to beat him because that was the whole point of it, was make it as hard as possible. And I think it succeeded in that way in a lot of ways. And I can tell you that, full disclosure, I'm terrible at the game, and I was called out so many times to play on Xbox Live or against, kids in the neighborhood or friends, and they would just wipe the floor with me every time. It did not translate to me. The buttons felt different than strings, and I really did enjoy seeing how it turned out in the game. I'm still trying to find the McFarland Lou Cipher character that they made for Guitar Hero, the figure. They had all the figures, but apparently I don't think he actually ever brought that one out. But if anyone has one, let me know, because I would like to have that. Had I known the impact it would have had, I probably would have spent more time on certain things, but that's hindsight. I think that the song turned out good, and it clearly, that game has had a phenomenal impact on bringing new players into the world. It re-inspired an entire generation to play guitar. I absolutely know that. And every once in a while, I'll bump into somebody that'll tell me that that game was what started them playing guitar, and perhaps that song was something that inspired them to learn how to play faster guitar or better or whatever. But I think it's always going to be something that sticks with me, and I have no problem with that. It was a lot of fun, and that game was monumental, and it really helped launch my career. It was the first game that I did in the video game business, believe it or not. It's kind of like being in Breaking Bad. What if your first gig was Breaking Bad? That's a tough one to top. However, I have had a great time for the last 13 years since then, working in all sorts of areas in video games and television, and it all has a lot to do with that song. So thank you, everybody. That is part one. So next up is going to be how to play all the rhythms. So stick around, that video is coming up.